I'm author and critic David Agranoff. I'm a horror and science fiction author, critic, and researcher. In this podcast, I wanted to provide in-depth interviews and panel discussions with everyone from New York Times bestselling authors to researchers, musicians, and anyone I find interesting. Welcome to Postcards from a Dying World. Hello and welcome to another special episode of Postcards from a Dying World. I know what you're thinking. It's been a while. It's been a minute. Yes, it has been a minute since I did an episode. And I want to promise those of you who subscribe that I am going to get back to the Science Fiction Hall of Fame series that we were doing. But the reason why I haven't had any extra time to do the podcast is I've been organizing the 2026 Philip K. Dick Philip K. Dick Festival in Orange County. So here's the thing. This is coming up August 20th through the 23rd. So when you get this episode, there's still a chance to go. It's free of charge if you're in the States or if you're in Southern California. It is an opportunity to get into the world of Philip K. Dick, and it's a unique opportunity because we're going to have some of his friends that may be making some of their last fest appearances that we can guarantee anyways. And then we won't be doing another fest till 2028, which is going to be Phil's Centennial. So, but we're going to be doing a lot of cool things. We're going to have table reads of plays. We're going to have different guests of honor, including Brian Evanson, Sarah Langan, Tim Powers. It's going to be a really great time. So please consider coming to the Philip K. Dick Festival, and it's philipkdickfest.com if you want any information. It's free of charge. And plus, Cal State Fullerton's archive is doing an Exploring Tomorrow exhibit with different manuscripts from their collection and fanzines. So if you want to see the original straight from the typewriter red pen version of Dune, it's going to be there. So really cool stuff. And that will be open during the weekend of Worldcon the next week too. So if you're going to Worldcon, you'll still have a chance to see the exhibit at Cal State Fullerton. So please make your way over there. So I'm sorry, Wally, you had to listen to that. I know you've been up since 4 a.m. in Spain, so we're gonna try to do our best to. Yeah, you're still muted, by the way. Just so you know.
Yes. Okay. No, yeah, I was enjoying listening to that, to be honest. Now I am aware of the Philip K. Dick Festival that's coming up, so that's good information.
Yeah, well, in 2028 it's going to be his centennial in the Bay Area,
Right.
and that's going to be a big one. So, but the other thing people should know for Philip K. Dick fans, we also do a live Zoom every Tuesday night, 6:00 p.m. Pacific time, with different guests all the time. We're not doing one until September because of the fest, but because we're meeting in real life. Speaking of meeting not in real life, but here over the internet, Wally and I've never talked before, so this is going to be a first time conversation. I did a little research on background, but mostly I wanted to learn about you from starting from reading this book. And we're friends on Facebook. I've followed your work a little bit before, but when this one came out, I immediately requested an arc from Daw because I was just very curious in what you were doing. Now, anyone who knows me knows that I love Nigerian science fiction. I've read a lot of the Nigerian writers and Nigerian writers in the diaspora. And so this is not a new territory for me. But I am new to your work. This is the first time I've read your work other than short stories. So first full length, but this is your second novel, correct?
That is correct. And also, if I may add, excellent choice in
Yep.
excellent taste in reading. Even though I am biased. No, I'm glad you picked this up. And look, if you're more of a science fiction guy, which obviously I get the sense that you are, then it makes sense that The Fist of Memory is the one that you would pick up. My first novel, Shigidi and the Brass Head of a Bullet Fund, was more urban fantasy, more playful, a bit more commentary on power dynamics, social political power dynamics, and cultural theft, essentially,
Mhm.
cultural and historical theft. This is more leaning into my core interests. I've been thinking a bit about, and as the book is coming out, and I've been thinking and talking about it more to people, I've also come to the realization that this book is essentially the purest distillation of all my various core interests over time into one thing. And we'll probably talk a little bit about those interests
Oh
and
yeah,
how
yeah.
they make their way into the book and percolate through.
Oh, we're going back for a little bit, but the way we do things on postcards is I do a spoiler warning at some point, and since this is a pre-release interview, it hasn't come out yet. A lot of people will not listen to the last part of the interview. We'll have to come back in a couple months when they read the book, but that's okay. We'll get out all the promotion stuff and all that stuff first. But the main thing I wanted to get into is you're an engineer by trade. Um, but let's get into your origin because I'm always interested in how people get into science fiction, how like this becomes a part of their worldview. And of course, so you grew up in Nigeria, and
Yeah.
were you always a science fiction reader? And of course, and whenever I talk to international science fiction writers, I got to ask, like, what languages were you reading it too?
Right. So I don't want to say lucky in a sense, but I'm simple in that I am from Nigeria, born and raised. I didn't leave the country until I was in my mid-20s. So it's baked into who I am.
Yeah,
But English is my first and only language. Which is a kind of spectacular achievement because in a country of more than 250 languages, I managed to only pick up the one that was imported from the colonial powers. So
right.
that's interesting. But I've always made the joke that I don't have a brain for language, but I have a brain for math. I tend to
Yeah,
pick up math really easily and I tend to forget language really quickly. So when I was
yeah. I have the
younger, I
exact
tried to,
opposite, so we make a
oh
great
right.
combo.
Ah,
Yeah,
wonderful. Yeah, see, we should team up. We should do like a buddy cop kind of thing.
yeah.
One can only learn language. The other one can only learn math. How will they solve the crime? Um,
Right.
but yeah, so I've always spoken English. English is the common language of Nigeria. It's the lingua franca. It's what we're educated in. It's what everybody speaks. It's the business language, the
Mhm.
governmental language. It's the official language of the country. So I picked that up. I speak little. Oh, I let me put it this way. I understand little bits of many different Nigerian languages, including a bit of Yoruba, a bit of Igbo, a bit of Urhobo, because I was born in the Niger Delta area. So
Mhm.
I'm familiar with all those languages. But to cut long story short, I mostly speak English and read English, and that's what I started reading.
Yeah.
And the way I got into science fiction essentially is I kind of inherited it. Um, because my dad was also an engineer,
Mhm.
hilariously. The exact same specialization. He was also a chemical engineer. And we
Yeah.
went to this exact same university and we're taught by pretty much the same professors.
Yeah.
But even when I was younger in the house, my dad was also a science fiction fan. And we had lots of mostly secondhand paperbacks of the pulps. My dad had a habit of collecting the year's best kind of anthologies, so the ones by the Hartwells,
Mhm.
especially the Hugo winners
Yeah.
series by Isaac Asimov. They were edited by Isaac Asimov. We had all of those in the house for a while, usually about 10 years behind the current date, but that was okay. We had the
Well,
Arthur C. Clarke, the usual suspects, essentially. They were all in the house. So I started reading them when I was young. But in parallel, my
yeah.
mother studied English literature and specialized in Nigerian literature. So I was also reading a lot of what we would call the classics of African literature. Ngugi Thiong'o, Chinua Achebe, Wole Soyinka, obviously. Um, so all of that. So I kind of grew up reading my parents' books simultaneously. And I guess if you take the the geometric average of engineer and English literature graduate, you get science fiction writer. So that's okay.
Right. Well, it was funny because somebody recently asked me why there were so many Nigerian diaspora and Nigerian science fiction writers, because there are quite a few that have had big success, and I think the fact that the colonialist language being English is one of the reasons, because I think if there's a concentration or certain number of writers that come out of that tradition, it's partially because of that. For the
Yeah.
simple reason of two, like we only started getting Chinese science fiction, for example, when Ken Liu appeared to start doing a lot of translations, and then once people realized that there was a hunger for these translations, then more people started translating, and
Yeah.
and I would and that barrier is not there with Nigerian science fiction, because the Nigerian writers are learning to read in English and writing in English. So I think that's why publishers are eager to get voices from other regions of the world, and that's how you get your Nnedi Okorafor's and like who wrote Goliath? That was a great one.
Tochi and Yebuchi.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
loved Goliath, and
it's a
so
great book.
you're getting these voices, and that's one of the reasons why I think we have now this rich. If you want to go on a tear of reading Nigerian science fiction, you can. There's plenty of choices, and I think that's great. So
Yeah, and I'll just add one more dimension to that, which is I have received pretty much the exact same comment from a friend and literary critic who is Malaysian. And
yeah,
she, was saying she also reads a lot of Nigerian literature. So she take the genre bit out and it still holds true. There is just
yeah,
broadly speaking a lot of Nigerian literature that is accessible to the public because there's a lack of a language barrier, so it can travel. There's a lack of accessibility barriers, so people all over the world can read it. And then the second thing I would like to add to that is some of it is just pure statistics. There are a lot of Nigerians. Like we are by far the most populous country in Africa. Second place is not even half of our population.
mhm,
So just from a pure numbers game, right? If you were, sampling writers of any genre in any kind of literature from all the countries in Africa, just on
yeah.
a pure probability basis, you will sample more frequently and get more hits from Nigeria by sheer volume alone.
And I apologize. There's somebody blowing a giant leaf blower right outside my window. I don't know if you can hear it,
I
but
cannot, so that's
okay,
okay.
good. Because I was sitting there. No. All right. Well, yeah, and the numbers game is an interesting thing too. But I think also kind of the Yoruba culture influence and the magical realism of the folklore like leads to, I think, to Nigerian writers having a really great sense for fantasy as well, right?
Mhm.
Like that adds to it as well. And if you learn a little bit about it, you can, with a lot of these writers, you can see that influence. And I'm sure that was more a part of your first novel
Mhm.
um, than this one. But although this is a very Nigerian novel, like Fist of Memory, just as much. And I think that's going to be one of the appeals for it for people, is because when you, especially for those readers here in the States, like we're looking to be transported and taken somewhere else, like this is a culture that we don't know. So um I think that's one of the things that's really great about the Nigerian science fiction. So let's talk about well, I love this idea that you guys are 10 years behind, and I've learned that um
Well, we were. The internet has kind of changed all that,
the
but when
internet
I
has
was growing
changed
up,
that.
it was
Yeah.
true.
Well, it's funny because punk rock is the same way, with when you see like bands styles of music and punk rock
Yeah.
are like in Malaysia or Singapore or whatever, they're always like, oh, these were the bands that were big here like 10, 15 years ago. And what's kind of nice about that is I like that style better. So I'm more into, I'm glad that they're doing this
Yeah.
thing. And it just took a while for the touring bands to percolate and influence this style. But one of the things that I love about Fist of Memory is it does kind of have a little bit of an old school feel,
Hmm.
in a great way, you know. And we'll get to that one, but I do think people get really interested in how um, people's science fiction journeys in other countries because um, you know we only know we know it from our own individual perspectives, but I think the way that you were consuming these books probably had a huge influence on how you became as a writer. Do you think that slow unfolding has a role in how you became a writer?
Definitely, it definitely did. I think so. Talking with people over the years, I tend to I tend to describe myself as having almost an exact blend, 50-50 blend of pulp and literary sensibilities. So I guess that some of that is what you're talking about, is that slightly old school science fictional, we need to solve a problem or explain the thing kind of happening while keeping action and plot moving. Um, and elements of that are in the book. But I also have a very strong literary sensibility as well. Like I said, I grew up reading
Right.
classic African literature. So for me, character and theme and all of these things are also extremely important. So people people will probably see in some sense that this book is in a way quite old school, but also very modernist.
Mm.
Um, and you know what? I love blending stuff. I love having multiple ideas and trying to find the best framework and structure to hold multiple ideas and identities and stylistic choices together in the same place. And that's also something that comes through in the novel as well, because you mentioned that this book is mostly science fiction and my previous book is mostly fantasy. But even in the first book, Urban Fantasy, there are elements of it that people have described as almost having a kind of physics-based structure to explain the way the gods work and the way certain fantastical elements work.
Right.
And there are elements of this book that are, for lack of a better term, magical realist, not fantasy,
Yeah.
but magical realist. And because those elements are drawn from real Nigerian history and the way people talked about things that were happening at the time. And so when I wanted to reflect some of those things in the story through characters, through the way they, for example, make an escape from a daring criminal adventure, an assassination or robbery or whatever, I'm referencing those real stories that we grew up talking about
Yeah.
in Nigeria as well. So the book is very much a blend, and I hope that blend all comes out to something interesting, like a nice little cocktail.
Well, and I'm sure that there's levels that it's working on that if you're from Nigeria, you'd get certain things that we're not going to get. That's just like the nature of things.
Yeah.
But and I promise we're going to get specifically into this book very soon. But I got to talk about the history of publishing with Daw. Uh, as Dickians, Don A. Wollheim was his first
Mhm.
editor. So, like the founder of Daw was the guy who kind of made Phil's career. So on the Dickheads podcast, we talk a lot about Don. We've had Betsy on the show to talk about her father. She was our first COVID interview. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Great interview, by the way. I read the transcript. It was posted somewhere, I think.
yeah,
Um,
and yeah, and Betsy's part of the tradition of science fiction through her father going back to the earliest days from the 30s. I know, like, um, one of my publishers, Pink Bean Press, is trying to take the Daw influence of like doing the colored spines to have all the matching colored spines. And, I think it's a really cool thing to be a part of the Daw tradition, but working with somebody like Betsy, who's been a part of the community like her entire life since she was a little Peapod, it's got to be a really cool thing, because I know you shouted out Betsy in your acknowledgments, but I just that's a really cool part of this book, is being a part of the Daw tradition, in my opinion. Right.
Absolutely. And it's come through in multiple ways. Right from my first book. The very first conversation I had with Betsy is, she told me one of the things she learned from her dad was you don't necessarily pick up specific books. You look for authors that have a voice and who know how to tell a story. And once you
Yeah.
have that sense that that's who you want to publish and you want to give them a shot and see how it goes. And she said that to me, and that was a really strong vote of confidence. And she's kind of gone out on a limb for me, but several times. Hopefully it's all paid off.
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel the sense of history that comes with working with someone like Betsy. And I think when all is said and done, she will have a bit of her own legacy as well. That's quite different because you mentioned how much Nigerian science fiction and fantasy, or science fiction at least, that you've read. And Betsy has been a big part of bringing Nigerian science fiction to the US. She published Nnedi Okorafor's Who Fears Death, which
Mm.
is the novel that kind of basically gave Nnedi Okorafor her first real big boost in
Mm.
visibility. It wasn't her first book, but it was the one that got her nominated for the World Fantasy Award, that got a lot of visibility on there. And Betsy has remained a trusted editor with Nnedi. I spoke to Nnedi a few times in Glasgow and in the UAE a few years ago. And when I told her I had signed with Dosh, the only piece of advice she gave me was anything Betsy says, just do. She knows what she's doing. Um, and it's kind of been like that, right? Obviously, things with Daw have evolved. The company is different. They are part of a larger structure now. But in all my dealings with Betsy, that sense she comes with that experience, with that knowledge, with that sense of history. And to be honest, one of my proudest moments was when she finished reading The Fist of Memory, and she told me that it is unlike anything she's ever read before. And I was like, I know you've read a lot.
Yeah.
So if you haven't come across anything like it, if you think it's unique, then it probably is. And I was like, okay, good. I think I've created something interesting here.
Oh, absolutely. And what you said about her advice, it rings true with, because in his lifetime, Philip K. Dick was not a guaranteed seller. Most of that happened after his death, after Blade Runner. And one of the things Betsy always told us was that her father would always say, "Great writer, can't sell a lick of books," like. But he stuck with Phil and published many, many of his books, even though he wasn't a top seller for him, because, as you said, he believed in the voice. So, all right. So now this is the non-spoiler part of Fist of Memory. We're probably going to get a little bit into it, but I don't know how my top 10 reads of the year are going to shake out when it gets all said and done. I suspect this will be on that list. Right now, as it currently stands, it's definitely one of the best books I've read this year. And one of the things about it is that, as a structure nerd, I really love the structure of the book. So a lot of that we're going to have to talk about when we get into spoilers. Although some of it I don't think is completely spoilery, but I do want to warn the people, like, if you want to go into this absolutely pure, like super super cold, like, this might be a good time to jump and then pause and save this podcast and come back when you read it, because I'm telling you right now, it's great. And I went into it, the way my system works, Wale, is that a lot of times I request a book from the library or from a publisher, and I forget why I was interested. Right, by the time that I get it. And then once this came in the mail, I did not look at the back cover. I just jumped in and said I must have had a good reason for why I wanted to read this. And for me, I went in totally cold. So, and I had a really great experience because it was kind of disorienting the structure a little bit. I see what Betsy's saying about how she hasn't read anything like it. This is a very unique science fiction novel, in part because, correct me if I'm wrong, but and the acknowledgments kind of confirm this, but this kind of started as different books that you
Yeah,
pulled together. Yeah. Over the years.
correct.
So,
Different stories,
yeah.
not necessarily books, but different stories. Yes.
Yeah. Different stories. And the connective tissue, one of the things that's really interesting about it is the connective tissue is really in the third act, right?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, characters from one part of the story do connect with them earlier, but for a lot of the book, you're wondering, like, okay, how is this going to connect? But one of the things is I felt in very safe hands. I could tell that the structure was very thought out. So I was fine to take the ride and be like, okay, this is going to make sense to me at some point. what's happening? Um, but we have a very science fictional tale and we have a very noir tale that is part of this. So one of the ways I would sell this book is that it's a crime noir meets hard science fiction, and where it goes, it's very interesting. And we're gonna have a very interesting spoiler discussion when we get to the end.
Yeah.
But and I'm sorry, that's a lot of talking for. So where was the origin for this? This is one you've been thinking about for many, many years, right?
Yeah, quite a lot. So I'm a huge cinema nerd, especially Hong Kong action cinema. I'm a real big fan of that. And one of my favorite movies is John Woo's The Killer.
Well, you
Um,
know, if we had been in my old office, my
mm,
last place, I had a giant poster of the killer on my wall
oh,
and
my
Crouching
man.
Tiger. So I'm a Hong Kong movie guy. So we just made buddies again.
Connect. Perfect. Yeah, I love most of his stuff, especially when he was in his bullet opera era, like
Yeah.
that prime, late 80s to early 90s period. Um, so I've always loved the story of the killer, and I kind of like a good revenge story. At the
Mm-hmm.
same time, I also grew up in um late 80s, early 90s Nigeria, which at the time was run under a military dictatorship. And there was a lot of crime, there was a lot of civil unrest. The country was unstable, to put it mildly. We were having canceled elections, riots in the streets, outbreaks of ethnic violence in different parts of the country, um, crime, lots of crime, assassinations. Um, there was a lot going on, right? And a lot of that all kind of percolated into my head. So when I started writing what would eventually become this book about 15 years ago, that was at the core. Those two things were at the core of my mind was I wanted to tell a Nigerian noir crime story that was stylistically inspired by Hong Kong action cinema. And I wrote this for like an online blog that was fairly popular in Nigeria at the time. And people loved it. I got hundreds, sometimes thousands of comments
Yeah.
on each entry because it was serialized online. And it was so popular they asked me to do another one. So I did a sequel featuring a minor character from the first series who it takes place years later in the future. So it was already a science fictional story. Um, and that character became the main character and he was out for revenge. But even as I was writing it and the science fiction elements were coming in, I already had this vision uh of a first contact story. And I knew I wanted to tell that, but I didn't know how it all connected either. And that's what took me a while. So when I'm glad that you liked the structure and that you kind of trusted the process, that it would all tie together eventually, because it took me a while to figure out the right balance that I was happy with.
Right.
So it's not like I was writing the story for the entire 15 years. I would leave it and come back to it and think about it a bit more about how much of the noir element did I want to leave in and how much of the first contact narrative did I want to bring in and where and how exactly do I want to tie them together?
Yeah.
And it
Well,
was when I figured that out, that's when I really started working on it properly.
well, and you should be pleased to know that my review that I've been working on, that I actually said, it's kind of like John Woo meets Arthur C. Clarke, and
Perfect.
in a weird way. And so, like when you started talking about John Woo, I was internally laughing because I see that and the bullet opera era, you know, and people should know that it's not just Wu and just Ringo Lam and
Yeah.
Choi Hart did great entries as well. I think the kind of the last great gasp for that was Time and Tide.
Mm.
Um, uh, Choi Hart. You know what's really interesting is Lisa Morton, who's the president of the was the president of the HWA, the Horror Writers Association, for many years. She wrote a book on Choi Hart, and she actually watched him edit Time and Tide. And
Oh,
I have
wow.
so many times I've been like, "Oh my God, you were in the editing bay when he was doing Time and
It's
Tide."
very
It's
hard.
like because she wrote
So
it in
cool.
the late '90s, right? And so she went to Hong Kong to interview him, and he was doing the edits for Time and Tide, and that always just blows my mind.
Right.
But um, somewhere back in my podcast, Lisa and Joey O'Brien, who worked as a screenwriter in Hong Kong, and I did a 3-hour podcast of our top 20 Hong Kong movies. So
I'll
I'll,
find it.
I'll
Oh,
have to
I'll
try
find
and
it.
find that for you because it's quite an insane podcast. But yeah, I felt that energy. So was Taupe the character that was in these serials, or did you totally reinvent this character
Yeah.
for this novel?
Um, so first thing, I mean, the character's name is Tokwe. It's a
Oh,
short
okay.
version of a Nigerian name, but I mean,
Okay.
it's fine. People read it however it works for them. Yeah, so Tokwe was always the main character. She was the main character of the first serial, and
Mhm.
pretty much a lot of the narrative structure remains the same in this one, right? There is the opening is pretty much the same. The assassination, she gets pulled into this thing that becomes a whole political plot. There's a betrayal at some point, and then there's a big action kind of finale. So all of those bones were in there. And in the sequel, um, actually Ahana, who now becomes the villain in this one, was the main character, was the protagonist of the sequel to the story that I wrote initially. But he was just such a vicious, revenge obsessed character that I knew he would work perfectly if I inverted him and made him a villain. So
Absolutely.
that's what I did, and then just had them be contemporaries, but going against each other. So that's a lot of what changed. And then introducing it to Meleng is what really made the the science fictional and first contact aspect of this work best for me because the ending, the third act where it all comes through. I had that vision from the beginning. I just wasn't sure for a long time how to connect from point A to point B while still telling Tokwe and Hannah's story. As part of that, and figuring out who Itumeleng was and why he was doing what he was doing was kind of the key for me
And the villain
in the story.
is your kind of connection to the mythology of the region and his um his revenge obsessions, and but he's got this kind of I mean the back cover refers to him as a witch doctor, but I think it's a little bit, I don't know. I kind of I don't like how that sounds a little bit, but I like the idea that he's a part of the, despite whatever like intentions or things that he has, he's spiritually connected to the land in a way that um is really interesting because in a lot of ways it would be easy to make the hero the one that has this spiritual connection, and it's a neat inversion because it shows like you know I don't know, it plays with a lot of what your standard thoughts would be, is that
Yeah.
a lot of people would be easy to make the hero like this kind of magical realist connection to
Well,
the
so
land.
just to clarify, so I think you're talking about Baba, who is the witch doctor,
Yeah.
who's kind of he's one. There are two villains. Ahana is the other assassin
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay,
character.
I see
Yeah,
what you're saying.
yeah.
Oh, he was
But
the
yes,
hero of the second one.
he was the hero of the second story that I wrote
Yeah,
initially that I inverted.
yeah.
But yeah, no, I see your point, and there were a lot of choices that I made in this book. For example, all of Tokwe's sections are in first person to kind of signal that she's the main character. But
Mhm.
to go to your point, a lot of people expect the person that has connections to the land and spirituality and all of that to kind of be the main character. And some of that is Itumelen, right?
Yeah.
He's even though he's an astronomer, he does have some of that in his background. Coming from South Africa, his grandmother had that connection, and he was supposed to have it. And he goes on this whole journey of self-discovery. And I realized as I was writing the story that people's natural instincts would be to think that Itumeleng was the main character. And one of
Mhm.
the things I wanted to emphasize without giving away too much is that this is not, as much as there's a lot of action and violence and there is talk about, there's a mystery about the aliens coming and all of that. This is not a mystery story or a pure action revenge story. This is actually a story about, to me, potential redemption, and redemption not just for individuals, but for all of humanity, and figuring out a different way for us to be together. And all of this comes through in the third act and
Oh
becomes
yeah, yeah,
very
yeah.
relevant.
We'll get into that in
Yes,
spoilers
but
because I
but because I realized that because a lot of that doesn't kick in until at least halfway through the book, I needed another way to signify to people who the main character was, who they should be paying a little bit more attention to. And that's why Tokwe's sections are written in first person, while everybody else is in third.
and that's a very interesting choice because and anyone who listens to my podcast regularly knows I'm not the biggest fan of first person. Partially because first person a lot of times takes me out of it because I pay too much attention to why is this person telling the story? Why would they be writing this? Why would they be? And so what's funny is, now bear with me here, because when I first read the first person, I was like, oh, okay, this whole book's going to be in first person. And then when it wasn't, I was pleasantly surprised, right? And then I started to wonder, okay, so all right, why is this author writing, making this choice? And because it's technically breaking the rules, you're really only supposed to write in one narrative form, but at the same time, the rules are meant to be broken. And so I think that's a really legit reason for wanting to do that. I recently did a novella where um it's funny because I wanted this Raymond Chandler-esque like speaking. So I started each chapter with an interrogation so I could get that speaking to the person, but then the interrogation leads into just the narrative, right?
Right.
And that was the method that I did for that. And so it's cool what you're doing here is really just highlighting this character, and then um I love it though because then it really creates a situation where we're trying to think about like why the story is being told in this way. I don't think your authorship kind of floats to the background because eventually I'm just rolling with it. I'm just
Yeah.
yeah. But the only time, and I'll say the only time I thought about it was that first chapter, and after that
Mm.
I was
That's okay. If you made it through, then perfect.
yeah.
It worked.
Well, it worked because the first chapter is where we get it. Okay, so I do want to get into spoilers here soon, so let's get into some general stuff about without spoilers. Now that arcs are starting to get out, the book's not released yet, but you got some pretty high powered blurbs on here. Your Tate Thompson's, your Ray Naylor, who Ray Naylor might be the guy that tops you for best number one book of the year so far, right? With Palaces of the Crow. So you guys are neck and neck 1 and 2. So you got him here, Robert J. Sawyer, Tchaikovsky. Like, this is pretty serious blurbs. How are you feeling about the reception that you've gotten so far for this book?
Good, actually. Again, with anything that you've kind of been holding in your mind for so long, eventually you kind of lose perspective, right? It's like trying to stare at an image in the distance for a really, really long time. Eventually your attention wanders, your vision falters, you kind of lose focus a little bit or
Mm-hmm.
lose perspective. At some point I kind of lost perspective. I knew what I wanted to do and I did it, but I wasn't sure how people would receive it. But since I finished it and handed it into Betsy, and Betsy gave, she was amazed, which was a great thing for me. And
Yeah.
since I've been giving it to people, or a lot of the feedback has been really, really positive. So now that the book is starting to come out, it's going to a few readers like yourself who, you have no direct connection to me. Like you said, you even forgot the reason why you requested the art, but you just engaged with the book and loved it. I've gotten lots of comments like that from a few people online. Um, Hopefully there will be many, many, many more because word of mouth is an important thing in actually getting books in front of readers and sales and stuff like that. I also just got a starred review in Publishers Weekly, which again, it's when you're doing something that's a bit tricky with POV, with structure, with all of that stuff, there are many potential failure points, right? It's like with engineering. The more complex a machine, the more potential failure points that you encounter. But so far, all of the feedback from trades, from people whose opinions I respect have been really, really good. So I'm proud of it. And I was kind of thinking, like, no matter what the reception for this book is, I don't think it matters. I think in
Mm-hmm.
my head, this will always be my book. This will be the one that when I look back on my career and they ask me like, oh, which of your books do you think most represents what you were trying to do or is kind of a high watermark of your career? No matter what the sales are, no matter what final reception by the public is, this will always be the one because again, it combines a lot of my personal interests. Is it includes a lot of really cool ideas that I've had for many years that I wanted to put together and hold together. Yeah, it's just something I'm extremely proud of. So I'm grateful for the positive reception, but to be honest, even if it hadn't been positive, I think I'd still be happy.
Yeah. Well, I don't think you have to worry. I think it's coming, but it's only your second novel, so eventually something later you're gonna be like, no, 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 this is the one. 'Cause maybe I don't
Perhaps,
know.
perhaps.
You'll see. I don't know. I mean, I'm I've got number 15 coming out this year, and
Ooh,
it's funny because it is weird how sometimes it's the one that nobody cares about that you know that just means like that did a particular thing for you.
yeah.
And this one is great. So before we get into spoilers, if there's any like if you want to give people like how they can find you, what they what you want them to find, what you want to direct them to, this is the time because we're about to do the spoiler gong. I don't actually have a
Okay,
spoiler gong, but
that's okay.
okay.
Okay, so you can find me pretty much everywhere at wtalabi.com. On Blue Sky, that's the name of that's my website as well, wtalabi, not woletalabi.com, just wtalabi.com. On the site formerly known as Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, the usual social media places. And what do I want people to pick up? To be honest, it's just the Fist of Memory. It's my latest and greatest. It's what I'm hoping as many people as possible pick up and think about and talk about. And if anyone reads the arc or picks up the book, message me about it whenever you listen to this.
Mm.
I'm on the socials. I like talking about book stuff. I review other people's books as well. So it's always fun engaging and talking about stories. So yeah, find me at any of those places. Oh, and I should also mention I have a newsletter now, which I
Mm.
just started. So if anyone wants to subscribe for that, you can subscribe from my website,
Yeah.
wtalabi.com.
And if we can get the timing correct, I should note that my intention is once the book is out in October, around November-ish, when my dickheads get a chance to read it, I want to have you on the live dickheads podcast, because I usually with those ones I usually like to, because our whole group, if we can get a couple of them to read it, we'll have a better discussion. But I definitely want to have you back when the book is out, or back on the other podcast
Yeah,
anyways. So
on the other podcast.
yeah,
I would, I
now,
would, I would, I would love to come back.
yeah, and the thing about that one is that is a live one where we have a whole group of people that will, take part in the conversation. And but they're serious readers, so they like me to give them a chance to actually read stuff. They like assignments. And so we'll
Perfect.
have another chance to discuss this in the future, I'm sure. The and since you will be our second guest on the live hangout from Perth,
Ooh.
because we had Ellen Greenham, the author of After Engulfment, who wrote a book about cosmic horror, and Philip K. Dick and Frank Herbert, and she teaches in Perth. So
Oh,
we have done Perth before,
all
um,
right.
which is very cool. All right, so now we're into spoilers. We're going to talk about spoilers. So at this point, you're warned, people. Like, pause this, read the book, come back. Um, and because we really got to talk about the ending, because I have very mixed feelings on the ending,
Okay.
because I'm not sure if you meant it to be horrifying, but I found it horrifying. But but um, we'll get there in a bit. But let's talk about how the structure came, because the whole first contact aspect of it, we have this in a weird way. I never you're taking like kind of a Hong Kong style noir and adding the to the genre of the big dumb object coming to, which is like and it's obviously not dumb, but that's the way
Yeah.
they've called it.
Video. Yeah, it's a video.
It's a medium, but yeah, so we have this object coming towards us, and it doesn't look like the stories are connected in the beginning, but they slowly start coming together. And I want to talk about how you structured this. Are you a pantser or a plotter? It feels like you're a plotter, and that's cool with me because I am a structure guy, and I outline everything and plan everything. So
Uh,
I'm
well,
cool with that.
I am whatever the story needs me to be. So for my first novel, I had no outline. I had a general idea of the kind of story I wanted to tell, but no real sense of where it was going. So that was Shigdi and the Brass Head of a Balafon. And I was kind of just being a pantser on that one,
Mm,
and seeing where it went. For this one, when I decided to actually, I'd kind of been pantsing my way in and out of it over the last 15 years. And when I decided to sit down and actually write it, I realized I couldn't do that. I
yeah.
couldn't just see where it went. So I actually needed to write an outline and a plot and structure to see where it made sense to tie things together and how exactly and where was I going to do all that. So I became a plotter out of necessity, for the kind of story I was trying to
That is
tell.
that is not a dirty word on this podcast. I am a big believer in outlines. And the thing about an outline is you can always go off of it if you need to,
Yeah,
if it's not working, or you can redo the outline. Um,
I did that twice on
yeah,
this.
yeah. I've done that many times. So if I always say, like, just because you look at a map of a city doesn't mean you've actually walked in the city. And so the people who are militantly anti-outline, I don't understand, because,
No.
and the other thing too is I think that there's a bit of some of the writers who are full-time writers are speaking from privilege. They don't
Mm.
have to be an engineer at their day job or teacher in their day job, and you know, if you can't get back to the novel every day, having the outline to go back to is very helpful.
Yeah, that was also a big part of it. And yeah, to be honest, I very much, now that I've done it both ways, I actually kind of think the middle ground is a bit of the best, where you
Yeah.
have a bit of an outline, not detailed, but just enough to give you a sense of where you're going, some key things that you want to put in there, some major points, and then you can kind of pants your way around it. And if you come to a point where you feel like the story needs to change, you change it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. So uh once you get your characters in motion and you start working towards this thing, how early were you trying to seed in, like, and how did you seed in these ideas of this world coming together thing post alien contact? Like, how aware of seeding that ending were you?
Very. So when I say like this book is a distillation of a lot of my interests and ideas, it's very true. So I have a short story that was published in the magazine of fantasy and science fiction back in I believe 2015, called the harmonic resonance of Ejiro Anabari, which is a bit of a title. But in that story as well, it has an ending that echoes with this one, about a kind of merging of minds and the formation of a dual consciousness where we are connected, where all of humanity is connected. And the reason why I wrote that story is because this idea of having more connection between people, more direct mental connection between people, is something that has fascinated me for a long time. And I completely get some of the potential and the feeling of this could be horrifying,
Yeah.
um, having minds connected in a certain way. But at the same time, some of that is also cultural. It's a bit of a cultural thing. Um, in a lot of African societies, not all, but in many, enough that in the 70s, a lot of African philosophers coined the term Afro-communitarianism as a way of kind of unifying all these different ideas and philosophies, where the thing that's codified in the philosophy is that the individual does not exist without the community. And the needs of the individual cannot supersede the needs of the community, but the needs of the community is made up of people. Therefore, the needs of the community cannot supersede any one individual. So then you now need to find what I call a double consciousness, where you are not just you, you are both you and your community, right? So this is the core philosophical idea behind Afro-communitarianism. How do you, where is the balance and how do you find it? And
Hmm.
where does it sit? So it's something that's always fascinated me. It's something I used to discuss with my dad a lot when he was still alive. We used to talk about different societal, pre-colonial African societal structures, how they tried to implement this in parts of East Africa, in parts of West Africa as well. And so I wanted to bring that in very early on. I knew that that's the ending I was going for, that that's the thing that the aliens introduce, is to give a technological basis for that philosophy to become a tangible thing in the world, where individuals become connected and remain individuals. So this is the thing, because some reviewers have described it that, oh, it's they become a hive mind.
Yeah.
Not quite. Not quite. What they
Yeah.
become is a connected consciousness.
Yeah.
Um, it's a connected consciousness, but not necessarily a hive mind. There is no single mind. You could say there are two minds now for every individual. They are both themselves, and then outside of themselves, there's this higher mind that's made up of the collective,
Yeah.
that's sitting beside it.
And I think part of it is, and it's a zeitgeist thing, but we had Pluribus happen last year,
I
which
know.
I'm sure you must have been like, oh, yeah,
Well,
like,
Betsy told me, Betsy actually emailed me and said, you have to watch this, because I like Vince Gilligan's stuff. I really like
yeah,
Better Call Saul.
yeah,
And I had seen ads for it, but I wasn't convinced that Pluribus was something I would like until Betsy emailed me and she was like, you should watch it. And then I watched it and I was like, I see. I see
Yeah.
what you mean. And in
It
fact,
is
I'm
it is a
because
similar thing, but it's different
correct.
in lots of individual ways. I actually was kind of disappointed in Pluribus because I thought the first episode was incredible, and then I felt like I felt like they kind of I thought it should have been a movie and not a TV
Mm.
series. Personally,
I I agree.
yeah,
I agree. And in fact, I should probably not make promises when I'm not 100% certain. But one of the things I have been thinking about and writing a bit of is an essay on what I call the problem with pluribus.
yeah,
That might end up being the title of the essay, is just the problem with pluribus. I think there's a core idea that the show is missing in the representation of a hive mind. And I don't know what Vince Gilligan's intentions are.
yeah,
Again, until we finish all the seasons and see how it all wraps up, it's a bit unfair
yeah,
to start highlighting problems. But I do think for sure the way the connected consciousness in the third act of this book is, in comparison to Pluribus, is that it's not a hive mind, it's a connected consciousness that has two layers. That's kind of the way I would describe it, where
yeah.
people become connected, but they're still themselves.
They're still themselves, and yeah. I still find it a little horrifying because for me, like as a somewhat misanthropic person, you know, uh, somewhat very misanthropic person, like the idea that I couldn't kind of escape connecting with, like, I mean, like one of the things that makes it very hard for me to live in a city is that I feel like I'm bombarded by people around me that, like, I'm like, oh, you talk to your dog that way, and like, oh my god, it's like, how can you go out dressed like that, like take a shower, whatever. I'm a very judgmental person at times, and the thought of like having my mind connected to people that, you know it just that part of it was like, I was like, okay, I this is happening in the book and I don't know how I feel about it, right? And so a lot of my review of it, um in the spoiler part of the review, was talking about how I had very mixed feelings about the ending. I thought it was a really cool reveal, thought it was really interesting what happened. It's a great ending to this particular novel, but um I feel like it's presented as like this thing that's going to evolve humanity, but I'm not so sure. Like, I feel like that would happen. So it was interesting because I don't know how to say this. It's not like I disagreed with it, but I wasn't sure I would come to the same conclusions, but I loved how it was revealed, right?
Yeah,
So I appreciated that. Does that make sense?
it makes perfect sense. And look, like I said, I love it's an idea I've been talking about with my dad since I was a teenager. So
Yeah.
I've both argued for and against the same idea for the last 20-ish years or so.
And
So
that's,
I
yeah,
fully expect the all the different sides of it. For the story I was telling, it is presented as, yes, it's a world-changing event, not necessarily better, but
yeah,
a change in direction to kind of lead us away from some of the worst aspects of ourselves, but it could also go towards something different.
yeah.
Yeah, there are multiple ways of looking at it. You don't have to agree with everything. I'm glad the story still worked in the end.
Hmm.
And
Well,
actually, what I'm thinking of is I would actually enjoy having a 1 hour session to talk about like the pros and cons of connected consciousnesses and why they could be good or not.
that could be our part of our topic on dickheads.
It would be very Philip K. Dick. It would
Yes,
be on theme.
yeah, and I think he would have been very interested in that discussion for sure. Yeah, and I'm trying to think if PKD did that because give me a moment because oh well, Null All, the story Null All has some
Right.
it's yeah, I would check out the story Null Ull by it's not the same kind of thing, but it's you'll see when you read it. I don't want to get, but he does.
I'm pretty sure I have read it. I have the Philip K. Dick collected works. I
Uh,
have pretty much all of them. So
yeah, you might have read it. It's the one where
might have.
the guy kind of gets all control of the universe at once. And yeah, I thought of Null a little bit when I was reading the end of this because, and I know it's not the same thing, but like it becomes this issue of like, well, once people have all this information and they can kind of communicate with each other, it becomes a completely different society would be completely
Yes,
transformed. And
correct.
yeah, well, and one kind of interesting thing is that you have a very narrow focus in this book on these particular characters in this situation, and so I mean there is a way to do this kind of story in a global way, and then there's a
Hmm.
way to do it in a very personal way, and this book takes it in a very personal way. So we don't really see how this is expanded, but the cool thing is that you have the opportunity because you've created this world that you may be able to explore this idea further, and I'm sure you've thought about it. So
I have, but I'm not sure I want to. I might explore it in like a series of short stories. So that
yeah,
I have thought about doing because there's lots of little, like I said, I've been writing this for a while. So there's lots of
yeah,
bits that never made it into the final novel that I could expand into like standalone stories that dig into one particular aspect of what was happening in parallel with the events of the book. I definitely don't think I would want to write a sequel to this.
yeah,
Probably not, but a series of short stories, maybe even a novella kind of set in the post third act world is definitely on the table.
yeah.
Um,
Well,
yeah,
yeah, because if you did a sequel, it would be hard because you know this book has a very unique structure, and it would be just kind of a completely different thing if you did
yeah.
something in that
It
world.
would be completely different characters,
Yeah, which might
with
be interesting, but at the same time, I see why that you'd want to keep this standalone. Um, and so one of the things that's kind of a really cool, like, because I always think storytelling is about parallels and reversals. And one of the parallels and reversals in this book is that the spacecraft doesn't say anything when it's coming, right? And we can't communicate with it. And it's funny. I have to kind of admit one thing too, and I remember now why one of my interests in reading this in the beginning is that I have a not published yet science fiction novel that's a first contact novel that has kind of a
ooh,
similar setup. It's completely done differently. They're not similar at all, but it starts with the non-communication of the craft coming. So I admit part of my curiosity was, are we doing the same thing? We're doing similar things.
right.
It's not the same exactly. Um, and a completely different kind of style of story. So we're not on the same. I'm not worried about that. Um, but I've thought about the non-communicative spacecraft thing too. So, but what I love the parallel of this device that does not communicate with us, and then we have this ending where it opens up communication to a level that seemed to me to be a metaphor for pre-internet world, post-internet world. Am I reading too much into this, or
Maybe a little bit, but not by much.
okay?
So a lot of this is, yeah, essentially there's a larger metaphor that I was going for here, some of which you've seen, right? The whole non-communication bit was I'm essentially using the first contact to act as a trigger or a catalyst
Mhm.
to bring out certain behaviors, tendencies that a lot of us as humans have, but especially the main characters in the book. So the main characters in the book, for Tokwe, for example, who has always wanted, she's a violent person, not by choice, right? It's kind of by circumstance. and you have Ahana, who is a bit similar, but has made he's complete. Ahana is basically what Tokwe would be if she fully gave up, like leaned into the life of violence completely, right?
Yeah.
Let all of the tragedies and everything just completely consume her. So they're almost mirror images. And then you have the politicians who starts, especially in Nigeria, they see this alien object coming and they don't know what it is, but to them it's an opportunity. So they start scrambling. They start to power scramble. And in the background, you have other groups of people are responding to this. And all of this is a catalyst. But really, the larger metaphor I was going for here is we hyper individualism in some way is a bit of a problem when we're trying to work as a group. When I think of humans as a collective together, a lot of the time when we're trying to work together for a common goal, one of the biggest problems we have is communication. It is, how do I let this person know that we have the same objective and maybe differ only in slightly, on smaller things. But then we start to get hung up on our own personal histories and traumas and dramas. And when something happens, we respond to it on our own very hyper individualist way. And in places where hyper individualism is the focus, the minute we feel uncomfortable, then we give up on the collective enterprise, right?
Mm.
Um, so that's one of the things I kind of wanted to highlight in the structure of the book. And you see it in the breakdown of there's supposed to be this planetary defense system, but the minute a real threat shows up, everybody starts doing whatever they want to do, um, without communicating with everyone else. So the non-communicatedness of the spacecraft is reflected is a way of highlighting our own communications problems
Mm.
as humanity. And by the time we get to the end, they give us a potential technological structure to not have that, to basically have this double consciousness where we can keep all our own internal motivations and desires and whatever, but connect with each other more efficiently and be able to share thoughts and ideas much more rapidly in this double consciousness, right? It's
Mm.
about communication, it's about connection and interconnectedness of people and perhaps the entire universe, right?
Yeah.
As a way of working together. So that's kind of what I was going for there.
Well, and for me, it's super exciting because to have this kind of thoughtful science fiction matched with kind of like the Hong Kong vibe is like something that I thought I was the only one that was triangulating those. So like when you get a novel that triangulates like the interest that you have, it feels like it's written for you. And in a lot of ways, one of the cool things about this book is it kind of felt like it was written for me and in a weird way. And like I appreciated that. I know there's not too many like Phil Dickian obsessives who had a period of being a Hong Kong film obsessive as well. So like I know I'm a particular weirdo, but
Oh, you'd be surprised. I mean,
I know.
you've
Yeah.
discovered another one of them. Where there's two of us on this call. That's a population of 100% on this
Yeah,
Zoom
right,
call.
right.
Um,
Well,
I'm
no,
I'm I'm pretty sure there are others.
oh yeah, I'm sure.
And I
Yeah,
I hope they find their way to the story. I've kind of been using that language.
yeah,
I've described it as John Wick meets Arrival, or John Woo's the killer by way of the three body problem,
yeah,
um, something like that, right? To try to
yeah.
triangulate all of those. But there
Well,
is a lot of
and
thought.
uninfluenced by having already had this conversation because I already worked on it. I said John Woo meets Arthur C. Clarke.
Yeah.
So like which
The
is
the,
I
the, the opening has shades of Rendezvous with Rama in it, and that is
yeah,
deliberate, even
yeah,
right down to the sentence level.
yeah.
Um,
Oh, for sure. And it's interesting because what I think some of us what appeals to some of us, at least those of us who grew up on Hollywood movies, like one of the things about discovering Hong Kong cinema is like, it has its own like kind of language. Like we get sick of Hollywood movies because we were like, oh, I know what's going to happen because it has its own language. And yes, Hong Kong movies have their own language too. There's things that you pick up on after a while, but it's a different language. of cinema, and it's one of the reasons why, like, um, Hong Kong cinema is so good, and that's why, or Korean cinema, or I know Korea kind of took over for being the best cinema in Asia at some
Yeah.
point, and yeah.
Yeah.
I like the Koreans don't pull punches. Like,
No, no, they do not. I love, especially Park Chan-wook. I love
yeah,
his whole Vengeance trilogy.
yeah,
Um, well, pretty much anything he's directed is great. But I will agree with you. I think Korea kind of at some point in the 2000s-ish, they kind of became the powerhouse of Asian cinema to me, at
yeah.
least.
I have a really funny story about seeing Old Boy in the theater here in San Diego when it first came out, and like, I don't think people really knew what it was about, but I had read about it. I didn't know what the plot was, but I went and saw it on a like Friday afternoon at like 5 o'clock because it was the first time I could go see it. And there was this couple that was sitting in front of me, and it was clear they were on their first date, and they went to see Old Boy, and I remember thinking to myself halfway through the movie, like, this date's not going well. This woman is not vibing with Old Boy. I could feel the whole time I was in the movie,
Hmm.
I could feel this woman like squirming in the seat in front of me, and it was one of the things that um, added to my experience of seeing Old Boy. But
You
um,
so you were actually watching two movies in the cinema that
yeah, yeah, sort of.
day.
Well, it's funny too because I saw Old Boy twice that week because I convinced one of my friends. I was like, "Oh, you got to go see this." And then, but I did make the mistake of telling him you'll never guess the ending. So he, of
Ooh,
course,
he was watching for it. Yeah.
was watching for it, and then he was very mad at me for saying you'll never guess the ending. So I've stopped like saying anything like that. Um, well, yeah, okay. So Fist of Memory, just super incredible. Right now, it's in my number 2 ranking of the year at this point, behind Naylor's The Palace of the Crow. And that is a really good spot.
That is a great spot. I love Ray Naylor's work. The Mountain and the Sea is one of my favorite books, and I keep recommending it to people. And I
Yeah.
love everything he's done. So I
The
will
Mountain and the
happily
Sea is what
stand
I
behind him.
consider The Mountain and the Sea, I consider to be the best science fiction novel of the century so far, in my personal opinion. Um,
I would not disagree with you.
yeah. And Ray, when he came on the PKD hangout and talked about hyper objectivity in science fiction. And then it was funny because as he was talking, I was like, oh, now I get the cover of the paperback. It's about hyper objectivity. I was like, I felt really stupid, like that I got it while he was talking, and I was like, by the way, I just figured out why the cover is the way that it is. I was like, I felt really silly, but anyways, no, this is so far. This is right up there. It's going to be high on my list, no matter what I read this year, because it is really just an amazing experience reading. I put a lot of work into my review, I'm going to try to get the review out before this interview, but like, um, this this has been a really great discussion. While I really appreciate your time, I know you've had a long day. It's late in Spain, so
No.
but I appreciate I just appreciate this book on so many levels because and I think Betsy's right. It is like nothing else. It's really and it's funny. I do want to tell, I have been telling people, like, hey, be patient with this book, not because it doesn't start off good, but because it builds in a way that is really great. It builds to a really good momentum, and that third act is something that I didn't see coming at all. So, like, in the way that even though it's all there, it was just really well done, and I felt like I was in good hands as a structure nerd. Feeling like I'm in good hands is everything for a novel. So On that note, anything you want to say to the spoiler people before we close out?
No, I think, well, maybe one thing. We talked a lot about the first contact element of the book, about
Mm,
the stylistic influences from Hong Kong cinema, about some of the philosophical elements of the book. The other thing I wanted to add is I do think there's little cool bits of technology in there. So if you're the kind of science fiction reader that loves imagining what the near future could look like. There's lots of really cool gadgets, direct neural interfaces and stuff that people use on a day-to-day basis. There's hovercraft. There's all sorts of really cool stuff. So even if you're just fishing for like an African cyberpunky near future cyberpunky vibe,
yeah. Yeah, we didn't talk
that's
about that.
noir adjacent, then you
Yeah.
will find some of that here too.
Yeah, I think some people will find the intrusion of the AI in it to be pretty horrifying, but and I kind of took it as like the way we kind of take for granted that like we didn't these phones like
Yep.
we didn't have them 20 years ago, and the way that they've kind of gotten into our lives. So that is a really interesting aspect or part of this book that I did highlight in the review, because I do think especially people are having like we just saw it yesterday with the HWA reaction to the essay that wasn't even that pro AI, but it got a woman kicked off the board of trustees from the HWA for just, you know, saying that she thought there were too many gatekeepers involved. And, this AI future where it's so intrusive was an interesting part of it, because like I feel like it's a realistic look into 20 years from now in a sense,
Potentially, yeah. And
potentially. But as
yeah,
an
so that's
engineer, I don't know how far
yeah.
how you know
I do like trying to imagine what potential future technologies would look like.
yeah,
And the one thing I want to highlight is, the AI in this story, in the Fist of Memory, doesn't stand for artificial intelligence. It stands for augmented intelligence,
yeah,
which is something I mentioned once early in the book. So it's fairly easy to miss. But the
yeah,
idea is, we're in the future world where we've arrived at that point where people have resisted generative AI to the point where
yeah,
they 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 don't want any kind of AI tool that was trained on potentially stolen data, that is so environmentally um, negative. Basically, all the reasons why people are anti-AI today. Then
right,
we've built these direct neural interfaces that essentially run on your own body chemistry as their
yeah.
energy source, and they're trained on data that's only in your own mind, right?
Well,
Um,
and keep in mind, I'm a Dickian, so I don't care
yeah.
about that stuff.
Oh
So,
yeah, I
like,
know.
yeah, Phil didn't care about things being realistic. I got to tell you this story because it relates to Betsy's dad. But it's a very famous instance with Phil that highlights how he felt about this was Martian Time Slip. When he submitted it to Ace, Don Wollheim's first note was that because Martian Time Slip took place in 1994, and Don Wollheim sent this letter to Phil or called him on the phone. I'm not sure how it happened in 1964, but he said, "Hey, Phil, we need to change this to 2094 because there's no way that we'll have a Martian colony by 1994." And Phil pulled the book from
Wow.
Ace. It got eventually published by Del Rey and Ballantine, and he pulled the book because Don Wollheim would not. His science fictional brain wouldn't let him make it 1994. And Phil's response was, "Well, in my 1994, we made it to Mars." And
Yeah.
it was important enough to him that he was just like, but then years later with Scanner Darkly, when Judy Del Rey wanted him to put it a little bit further in the future, he did change it for her in that particular case. And the manuscript's at Fullerton, and you can actually see where he crossed it out and wrote the new year, which is
That's cool.
really interesting, but I always think it's funny that he said, well, in my 1994 we made it, so
Yeah.
whatever, I don't care what you think, but
Yeah.
funny.
And to me, the future is always about the future is not about predictions, about possibility. So
Yeah,
the some of the technologies I introduced in this book are about possible future responses to current trends, right? Current trends around generative AI, both what is being promoted and what people are pushing back against. So what could that mix
yeah,
of things end up evolving into? And there's
yeah,
some
and
of that in the book. There's lots of other cool bits as well.
yeah, I love the
Um,
names that they have for their AIs, like,
yeah,
that and I think that or for their augmentative intelligence, right? And they're a part of them, and it's a really cool part of the book. All right, I've taken enough of your time.
yes,
So Wale, I really appreciate this book on every level. So and I should have said this at the beginning, and I might cut this and put this at the beginning, but this is going to be episode 197 of Postcards from a Dying World. And
good
for
number.
episode 200, I recorded an episode live at Verbatim Books here in San Diego for Amazing Stories 100th anniversary back in April. And that will be the 200th episode. And that will feature Philip Fracassi, John Mayberry, Cody Goodfellow, and a real powerhouse panel of science fiction voices that are local here, talking about the 100th anniversary of Amazing Stories. And technically the term scientific fiction. So that'll be a real big episode. So keep your eye out. That's going to be in 3 more episodes. So 197 here, Wole Talabi, this was a great book. Thank you for coming. And folks, look out for once the book is out, an appearance on the Dickheads podcast. So thank you for your time.
Excellent. No, thank you. This was fun.
All right.